All right, everyone. Donald Trump has unveiled his new tax plan proposals. Now, we've got to remember one important thing here. The executive branch doesn't get to, unilaterally fiddle around with the tax system in the United States. Congress has to get involved. That means getting around Democrats and never Trumpers. It also means somebody like Rand Paul might stand in the way and say, no, it doesn't go far enough. It's only meager. But I'm looking at it here, and it looks pretty good. Maybe not. It doesn't contain everything that I would have liked to have seen in a tax plan. Eliminating the self-employment tax for people who are not in the upper brackets would have been nice. That would have affected me more. But doubling the individual exemption that people get from within the middle class, yeah, that would be wonderful. You realize how many thousands of dollars people in the middle class would save under such a tax plan? And that would be more popular even for the Democrats. Like, they might actually support such a thing. And if they don't, it's a huge Trump trap for them, because then Trump can come out and say, oh, yeah, well, I gave this to Congress to fiddle around with. You could have retained this and at least given relief to the middle class, to the productive aspect of the economy and to small businesses. All those people will turn on the Democrats ultimately if the tax plan, at least if that portion is not passed. Now that it's been proposed, they might as well pass it, because otherwise he'll be able to, I think, successfully grandstand. This would also shoot the economy into hyperdrive. Lowering the corporate tax rate, for instance, from 35% at the top level to 20%, that's good so long as you're eliminating deductions, which is exactly what he's talking about. If they can get this accomplished, what you will have is this situation. They're talking about, oh, it'll increase the deficit by trillions of dollars. Not necessarily. You've got to understand, a handful of extremely massive corporations in this country do an extremely massive proportion of all the commercial and industrial business within the country. They use deductions, they use loopholes in order to avoid paying fundamentally any taxes in many cases. If they pay anything, it's nowhere near 35%. If you drop the top rate to 20, which is more in line with reality, it's closer to what the government should be taxing a business at. It shouldn't be, a third of everything that they're friggin' making. What you have is that if you eliminate the deductions and loopholes that they're using, they're paying 20%. They're not paying that sky-high rate that you had before, but they are paying something. That's still more than nothing. Right now, a lot of them do pay nothing, or they have so many deductions they pay maybe 5%, maybe 10%. They won't be able to do that anymore. They'll have to pay more. Meanwhile, small businesses will generally pay less. Now, the tax plan as is, supposedly, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, according to some, oh, it won't affect like 2/3 of small businesses. Okay, the mom and pop bookstore maybe was already paying less. What about certain types of businesses that are very, very wealthy on paper, pay that sky-high rate? Ultimately, they operate at a net loss, have to be subsidized. You would think of farming groups. Certainly anything related to farming has great difficulty, because on paper, if they're paying a business tax rate at all, they're getting screwed. Oh yeah, we've got like 200 acres. Oh, well, you've got so many assets. You're worth millions and millions of dollars. Yeah, you made $8,000 last year net profit after taxes. What a wonderful world we live in for all the food that you're producing. Therein lies the problem number one. Certain industrial endeavors, startups maybe, entrepreneurship. This should be inserted. New startups, new entrepreneurs that are just getting started should get additional tax relief, in my opinion. If you go after the self-employment tax on this measure, business tax, it doesn't matter. Get them started so they can stabilize, and then they can pay a higher tax rate once they've actually grown. That would be another thing. This will be helpful for regional chains. That 2/3 doesn't include, you'd think of a store like we would have around here, like Tops or Hannaford's. They're not a national brand. They're certainly not a multinational brand. They are a big business, technically speaking, and pay a sky-high rate. But ultimately, they're not nearly the size of something like Walmart. They're not nearly the size of something like McDonald's or Burger King. They're not spread all around the whole friggin' United States, sometimes with subsidiaries or groups in other countries. Now, another thing you got to realize is that these massive corporations often have all sorts of offshoots, like Sears owns Kmart. Well, they're technically thus separately functioning competing entities, but they're owned by the same parent company. So what does it mean? What does it matter? A lot of times you get this with restaurants. People say, well, I have brand loyalty to one restaurant over another. They come to find out, or they don't even know, the restaurants are owned by the same company. They're only technically competing. The same people profit regardless of who wins out in that competition. It's a little bit shifty. It's a little bit odd that they get away with managing to hoodwink the population. Like, people aren't even aware that it goes on. Like, you have some monopoly, you have like Kraft or some other monopolistic group, and people don't even know about all of its sub-companies that they think that are competing. And they're not. No, they're just filling in different market niches for different price ranges, different types of products. You know, a generic food made by the same company that makes a name brand food, they drop the price a little. It's the same exact thing. Somehow they get away with this. This would be good, I think, for the economy. It's not going to screw the poor. It's also not trickle down. For the biggest corporations, this is going to make them pay more. Do people understand this concept? That because of the way our tax code is structured, because of how arcane it is, he's talking about simplifying it. It's going to be difficult to do that, especially when Congress has to act, but if he can get it accomplished, great. Because it's so complex, some corporation that has offices all over the world and 1,000 outlets in the U.S. pays basically nothing. They don't pay 35%. See, what the Democrats want you to see, they don't want tax reform because they want the economy to be screwy, because they get money from these big corporations. Here's the secret. So they want to protect them. Don't let them fool you for a minute thinking that they care about the poor or the middle class. I think at this point most people know better. Here's the secret. The big corporation on paper is supposed to pay 35%. So if you're a pro-tax, you know, you're on the left or something, you're like, oh, well, we need more welfare, we need, you know, tax relief for the lower class, you probably like that 35% rate a lot more than 20%. But they don't pay it. There are so many loopholes, so many workarounds, that maybe they pay 5%, maybe they pay 10% on a rainy day. They probably pay close to 0%. You simplify the tax code, you can drop the overall rate, they're still paying more, they're paying 20% now. Well, isn't that wonderful? They are paying more into the economy. It's just a lot less complex. See, now they can't have the army of lawyers and accountants who all will lobby against this, trust me. All the corporate lawyers in the country, they're arming up as we speak to get prepared to go talk to whatever senator they've bribed to stand against this deal. Now they're actually paying something, or they're paying more than they were before in many cases. And if they're not using all the deductions and loopholes and they were paying above 20%, yeah, give them a little tax relief. Let them expand further. Maybe they're one of the good guys. Maybe they actually believe in paying back into the economy. I know it's difficult for people to understand that concept, that there can be people who have made it, you know, they've made it, but they don't want to screw anybody else over. But I can tell you, that's definitely the case. There are people who have some degree of moral fiber. You know, they didn't start out rich. Maybe they were born into total poverty. They managed to make some good investments. They built a business. You know, they inherited the general store from grandpa, and then they turned it into a regional chain, and now they're a suit-wearing CEO with a limousine. It doesn't mean that they've forgotten where they came from. Ultimately, even all these families, for the most part, unless it's like the Rothschilds or something like that, no, they didn't come from wealth in some primordial manner. They were not born into it. They worked over time intergenerationally and did good things in some cases. I support this tax plan, generally speaking. The amount of relief that it will give me personally, as someone who's in that middle class bracket, will be, you know, relatively limited. It's a bigger overall single, you know, like individual deduction that you can take. That gives me a few thousand of relief, which is peanuts compared to the overall rate that I would have to pay. But it's better. It is an improvement. Doesn't take care of the self-employment side of it, which is problematic, you know, for someone who's self-employed. But it's better than before, and for a lot of other people, for anyone who's got a salaried position within the middle class, it's better for them. So good for you. Some millions of people in the middle class get tax relief. Not screwing the poor, not going to screw over small businesses, at least in its current, you know, lattice-style form. This is just a proposal. It's not been implemented. It's not fleshed out yet. The basic idea, though, is good. Some of those big corporations will pay more. No, you won't have trillions of extra deficit. You'll have an increase in the deficit, but it won't be nearly that large, because some of these groups will end up paying billions and billions of dollars more than they otherwise would, and they can afford it. They can afford a 20% rate. They couldn't afford 35% in most cases. That's what puts a regional chain out of business. That's why you've got an ever-rotating, group of these smaller businesses that keep buying one another out as they slowly go bankrupt over time. Look at what happened to Ames. Look at what happened to, I think it was Purity Supreme. And that was a great store. I remember, like, this is when I was a kid. The economy was going along well. I can remember when it was replaced by Shaw's over in Lebanon, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a low-tax state compared to Vermont. It doesn't even have a sales tax. They got plowed under because of the arcane tax system that was in place at the time. And it's still there. It's still a problem. It's interventionism. By the way, to people who are concerned, oh, the deficit will go up. Well, number one, you didn't seem concerned under Obama if you're a Democrat. You probably didn't worry about it under Bush if you were a Republican. Stop worrying so much about it. You obviously don't care about the issue. You just drag out that term anytime Trump suggests something. Number two, why don't you just cut a bunch of bureaus? I'm serious. Cut a few million government positions or something. Why not? That's how you can save that money. Put them into the privatize them. Increase the private economy. You can tax them too. Why do we need an NSA? Why do we even need an IRS at this point? Taxes should be as simple as... We should do what Estonia does. I think you can file online and it's a single page. Why don't we have... Other countries do this. Why do we have to have such an arcane system? It's not necessary. It's too legalistic. It takes people a lot of time. You can't fill out your own taxes unless you're... I mean, if you didn't make anything, okay, then it's easy. Oh, I didn't make anything. And Trump says you can file your taxes and just write, I win on it. Like that's actually going to happen. That's a pipe dream. Funny one, but it's a pipe dream. But we don't need to be so bureaucratic and legalistic. It can be more simple. He's talking about simplifying it on the tax code side. Why don't we just get rid of a bunch of bureaus and regulations that we don't have to enforce then? No problem. You can take care of whatever the shortfall is by cutting the size of government. It's what we should have been doing for a long time. The last time anyone even froze the size of government, it was Ronald Reagan. People thought he was going to axe a bunch of programs, take a hatchet to them. He didn't. He just froze their growth for a while. And look at what happened. The private economy caught up, and things generally went well. That led to a boom. And then another prolonged boom, actually, in the 90s, which was paired with the dot-com world. You'll notice that the internet sites do really, really well compared to brick and mortar. I wonder why that is. Could it be because of less regulation? Because it's almost still a Wild West internet in which everything's interconnected and a lot of the production is decentralized and it's individual and very self-employed style? Yeah, it's more efficient. It's also less taxed. It's less regulated. It's less bureaucratically managed. That's the power of the internet. We should let the brick and mortar businesses reflect that more closely. Perhaps they'd be more competitive. And trust me, dropping the business tax rate to 20 from 35 for a lot of those regional chains that pay way more than 20, that's going to make them way more competitive on an international scale. People will finally come to the U.S. to do business again instead of coming here to get some low-wage job. Like, people will actually be able to be entrepreneurs again. There will be room for upward mobility. I strongly support this tax plan. It's not perfect, at least by my standards, but it's good. It's better than what we've been straggling along with for decades and decades that obviously does not work. It's time to change it. It's time to reform the system. That's about all. Peace out.